Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for hanging with me on this Monday. And if you've taken some time out of your busy schedules to support my channel, hitting that like or subscribe button, I appreciate you for that. All right, so the biggest issue you are going to run into this time of year is the time you have to spend in an area to get a bite. And I think there's a few bait options and some dead giveaways when you're out there that will really key you in on what you need to be throwing. But I think the biggest thing is to be patient and really fish your areas thoroughly. So what I mean by that, if you live on a lake that has some really good offshore structure, big contour changes, maybe it's a point, maybe it's a drain, but pretty obvious places where bass are gonna get in the spring and in the summer, it's not really like that in the fall. You can't just pull up to the steep side of a point, make 15 throws, and go to the next spot, get in the middle of a drain, cast around, go to the next spot. You really have to zigzag, tack back and forth on these spots, because you see those fish come up schooling. 1 second they're out in the middle of the lake, and the next second they're up in a foot of water, and that's just the nature of a bass in the fall. There is a buffet, and they are going to use the entire buffet, and unfortunately for you, the buffet is the entire lake. In the springtime, the buffet is a certain type of rock bank or a grass line. In the summertime, it's a hump, or it's a drain, a ledge on the side of a creek channel, and it's pretty obvious. You pull up, you fish it, and you're good to go. This time of year, you don't just get on the steep side of the point. Sometimes they're on the shallow side. They're over there where they could be anywhere, and you got to fish the whole thing. And I think if you fish on a lake that doesn't have significant structure in it, very big contour change, like you just have a very flat lake, you may be thinking, well, that's how I usually fish anyways. And that's the mentality you have to take to lakes that do have lots of contours, lots of places where a bass like to go. But for the most part, in the earlier months, they're getting on one spot. This time of year, they're everywhere. So your track on your GPS should go around the point. Maybe they come up schooling right in front of your boat. Maybe they're out there, but they're constantly just moving around, and you need to be following them. There's times a year where if you just sit your boat in one spot, there's going to be a sweet spot that bass keep going to. It's not like that this time of year. Those little shad are moving them around, and they're going with them. Now, I got a couple different baits, and I like to fish two different ways in these type situations. So the first one would be something you can cover water with. And I think the key to that is if they come up schooling in between where your lure is at and the boat, and you bring your bait through them, you should catch them 100% of the time. Now, that is not always going to be your best bet at catching the biggest bass, but to just get a bite, to locate a general area where the fish are at, you've got to be throwing something that gets bit. And there's no definite, because I've seen it where they'll only bite a fluke, won't touch a little swim bait. There's specific baits, so you have to go through them. Once you figure one out, then you're good. You can probably just keep that in your hand, but it's very important to lock that in your hand and move around. There's no sweet spots anymore. Now, one thing that I have seen in specific situations, steep rocky banks where the positioning of the bass is going to be completely different than the schooling fish, and the size of the bass, you'll typically find a little bit better size doing something different. The same thing with grass, heavy cover. You'll see bass that aren't necessarily interested in those little threadfin. They'll be hunkered down on the edge of the grass. They'll be sitting on a rock pile, or they'll be on a point, but they'll be different places. That's where I really like a jig. And that's where I really like a drop shot. Something that you can fish slow on the bottom for bass that may be feeding on crayfish, maybe feeding on bluegill, bigger shad, but they're not interested in those shad that are moving the fish all around. Now, you can't really pick and choose what type areas you're going to get to fish in the fall. You basically got to take what you can get. So you may have an area where you're seeing smaller bass this size chasing those little threadfin around. And every once in a while, you can catch a good one out of there, but for the most part, those bass significantly smaller. You then have a different size class bass that's hunkered down. Now, that is a very conditional technique. So when you're fishing a jig on the bottom or a drop shot and it's around rocks or grass, you really need a calm day for that to go down. Because once you have some wind and some clouds, the forage that those bass are feeding on, it's going to be all over the place. The bluegill are going to be all over the place. It's not so much about dragging something fishing slow. Now you need to pick up something a little bit bigger, a little bit more intrusive, and then go throw that. So if it's windy in the grass, I really like a lipless crankbait. If you're on a rocky bank, something like that, I really like a spinnerbait. But it's going to be two different size classes of bass, one that isn't moving around a whole lot but still has plenty to eat, and then there is one, and again, you can't pick and choose what type of areas you get to fish this time of year for the most part. So you sometimes will be in areas where all it is bluegill, all it is crayfish. There's no threadfin shad. It's just big forage, and you're just catching those quality bass. So that's very important this time of year to have a bait that you can cover water. And again, it's not like it's just one spot. You know, you're staying in a relatively large area, and you're gonna find places where those shad kind of keep funneling through, but it's not like it's right here one cast. You got to keep moving the boat around. So try that, guys. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.